Hey everyone, welcome back to the Beat Your Genes podcast. This is episode number 332, and in today's episode, Dr. Lisle discusses questions related to personality differences in seeking complete understanding when asking questions about different topics. Another question about an estranged child-parent dynamic as the child has grown up into an adult and now has their own kids and the listener's grandkids. And then we have a final question about dating when it feels like it's close enough to a great relationship, but not quite, and some of the dynamics at play there. Let's see what Dr. Lisle has to say, and we'll see you inside. Dr. Lisle, how are you doing today?
Good, good. How are things?
Things are good. I'm looking forward to some good questions here.
Got it.
Yeah, and I think yeah, we had some good feedback from last show. A lot of people enjoyed the discussion. This time we're gonna talk about kind of a little bit more on the attachment side of things and understanding. That's our first question. But how's life over
Okay.
there in Northern California for you?
All good. All good. All right. You guys, assume you're warm down there.
Yeah.
That's good. I think it's also warm, getting hot back east where Jen is. Jen's not going to be with us today. She's got too many irons on the fire. So we'll go solo like old times.
Perfect. All right.
All right.
Okay, so our first question here is, dear doctors, through my life, I continue to encounter people who have a deep attachment to understanding. They seem to only feel satisfied, secure, or at peace if they understand their object of attention, feel they have a concrete plan of action, or believe that they know all the details there are to know about a situation. Not having these things leaves them anxious, unsteady, or even prone to despair. So the question is what personality and evolutionary factors are at play here?
You know, I'm a couple of things. By the way, you're slightly garbled. It's probably fine on the recording. But the question was, so the very first part of this it was about attachment. So, tell me a little, could you reread that first sentence so that I understand? Because I think I understand the question, but I'm not sure I do.
Yeah, the questioner is asking that they continue to encounter people who have this deep attachment to understanding. So I'm not quite sure what this attachment understanding was. When I first read this question, I just thought, well, everybody wants to understand to some level.
Right.
And some people are just wanting to understand more than others, I guess. But
Yeah, I think I understand what we're talking about. So, probably what they are referring to is you're getting into the area of a juxtaposition of high conscientiousness and some degree of emotional instability that starts to give rise to what we're going to call OCD. Okay, so OCD people are if you meet a bright OCD person, they can, quote, be attached to understanding like you can't believe. Like they want to know every detail of everything, and they want to understand where every molecule is and how dangerous it is and everything else under the sun. So that's what you're looking at. And um, these are these are fairly common genotypes. In other words, I've run into many of them in my lifetime, and I'm usually not a week goes by that I'm not talking to somebody that has these characteristics. So the that's what you are looking at. In other words, attachment to understanding means that I'm feeling anxiety unless I understand how the world works. So fundamentally, the job of a brain of an animal is to make the correct inferences about causality effectively in order to be able to predict the action of variables in front of them. So the job of the brain is to actually be predicting the future. That is absolutely the purpose of that brain. So the brain is, in order to do that, what it does is it effectively is making causal inferences. So and those inferences are always based on limited data. So sometimes it's wrong, sometimes it doesn't quite fit, but you can see that that the better it fits, the less cause for anxiety in a nervous system, because it's like, no, I understand exactly how this is going to work. All the dots line up on the line. Therefore, I am secure because I'm not going to get blindsided and experience some catastrophic loss because I didn't see something coming. Okay. Now, in truth of the matter is that you never see it all coming. So you don't see the laundry truck coming around the corner that wipes out you or your best friend or your wife or somebody incredibly important to you. In other words, you cannot see it all. So therefore, there's going to be varying degrees of anxiety about the state of how sure I am about, do I understand causality well enough? So my very good friend Larry, our famous OCD person that we've never had on camera, but Larry's famous. He was a producer in Hollywood, so he would drive everybody crazy by making sure everything was set up properly for a very expensive shoot, because you're out there burning $200,000 a day or whatever it is that they're doing. And so he was famous for saying, "Are you sure?" "Yes, I've got the permit. Are you sure?" So he are you sured his crew to death. And that's because inside of that highly conscientious brain was an anxiety that said, I'm not sure about how this all fits together. And therefore, I'm not sure what problems that may arise, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things I actually learned from him, which sounds like, I learned this at my daddy's pinstripe knee. No, but I actually learned from Larry early in the game about, not that I followed this faithfully because I got my own personality and psychology, but to some extent, Larry's estimation of how much time you should allow for yourself to make sure you get to the airport to get through security was very different than my own. And I said, since that time, he looked at me in horror at the basically tight fits that I was willing to put myself into, that seemed to me to be reasonably reasonable. I wouldn't want to be sort of burning an extra hour at the airport waiting for a plane. And but Larry's production manager psychology was like, oh no, you should go the night before, get yourself one of those hotels that's right next to the thing. That way you're 5 minutes to the airport. There's like there's no way you're going to miss that flight. And so I've actually kind of moved my line over one notch as a result of being exposed to that hyper-conscientious personality and getting inside his head and watching how that thinks. And because he would say, when you're doing complicated things, there's all kinds of stuff that are going to go wrong that you're not going to see. You better have redundancy built in. You better have time built in, because things are going to go wrong. And he's absolutely right about that. So those people and that personality is probably necessary for some of the very complicated, coordinated, economic behavior or military behavior that human beings have ever done. When things get complicated, you better have a worrywart that needs to, quote, understand it all. And that's what that is.
Yeah, I can imagine that this high conscientious and slight instability could be actually really useful combined with high intelligence. But if someone can't comprehend, no matter how well they get explained it, if they can't comprehend the situation, they may go, I mean, I say this word crazy, I don't mean it pejoratively. I just mean they can go insane, actually. Is that
ballistic? Actually is what it is. In other words, that's where Larry would start yelling. It's like, hey, no, we're not doing this until we understand. And you can just imagine a lot of the tragedies that you've seen. There's no way, Larry, if you put him in charge of that the Titanic sinks. There's absolutely no way that would have happened. And so, this is, are you sure? Where's the field glasses? Et cetera. These are characteristics that can be enormously useful. But as someone who talks to a lot of these people, they're also very expensive psychologically for the individuals that have them. It's like, you don't want to live inside those heads. They have to live inside of there. They don't have a choice. But but it's instructive to watch the world and look at, mistakes big and small, and understand that those were avoidable had someone been, just a little bit neurotic and a little bit hyper-conscientious. In other words, out on far sides of the bell curve, those tragedies wouldn't have happened. So so anyway, but that's who those people are, and that's why the way they are. They have the very same characteristics as everybody else has, except with greater degree of anxiety and greater inferences about the possibility of loss. So those things make them relentless in trying to get to the nature of causality. Something I don't have that kind of anxiety at all. I'm much more stable inherently than that. But something in the conscientiousness that I have is akin to that. It's not at the level that I've seen, but the notion of, unless I understand it, I'm not going to go forward and parrot it, and I'm not going to try to build the argument on that sand. I need to understand. And I watched my dad that way. My dad, obviously this is inherited. And so the determination that no, I'm not going to make the next inference until I understand the causality of the first proposition. And so that's how you wind up basically wandering through grad school for 6 years, not being willing to affiliate yourself with a psychotherapeutic school. And the reason is none of them can explain the causality. Okay. None of them can explain causality. None of them actually have an explanation that's anything other than a superficial description. So the cognitive therapy as well, people have negative feelings about the self, the world, and the future. It's like, why? And how is that? How does that make the depression? These were really interesting, sort of wide open questions that were not being addressed. It was like close enough. And people bought into it, and then they ran with some tools that might have been useful, but they weren't based on really tight logic in a lot of cases. And so that's how, when I ran into EP, suddenly I was, in reading Richard Dawkins, I was watching a mind that actually was building the argument on absolutely unshakable first principles. It's like, okay, this is how it works. This is how it works all the way down, not just to cell biology, but this is how it works all the way down into the particle physics, except that cell biology and its chemistry. It's like, okay, now we're getting somewhere. Now we can start to build inferences out from this, like one little step at a time. And so that was a huge relief and excitement for me, as I finally understood what on earth humans were doing on this earth. They were here competing for survival and reproductive resources. I had no idea. No, nobody. And so you're doing clinical psychology and you don't know what the purpose of the organism is. It's like that concept is not inside any psychodynamic or cognitive behavioral school. What is the purpose of the organism? What is it up to? Answer, it's out to get resources for survival and reproductive success. That's what it's doing. Well, only once you understand that that's doing, now you can have a much better understanding about making causal inferences about what the hell people are up to. Okay. So consider depression. Well, if you're psychopharm people, it's like, oh, well, you got something wrong with the biochemistry of your brain. If you are cognitive therapy, or if you're dynamic, oh, you have losses early and you're grieving them, for the next 50 years somehow. And if you're cognitive therapy, it's like, oh, well, you've got, stinking thinking, and you're thinking overly negatively. It's like, that's interesting. None of them are actually looking at this thing from the standpoint of evolutionary biology. So evolutionary biology would say, why the hell would you have massive amounts of people with motivational emotional machinery that would cause them to be very depressed? How that their chemistry is wrong. That's bullshit. Okay, their neurochemistry isn't wrong when it comes to organizing their temperature regulation or their breathing. Why would it be wrong with respect to their mood states? That just makes no sense at all. Okay, what do we do? Do we run around giving cats Prozac because they're depressed? Of course not. So why would it be just one species? Okay, so that argument falls apart under the lens of evolution. It doesn't fall apart with respect to rare people that would be bizarre and odd. Evolution is going to throw some mutants out there. So it's no surprise that one in, some X number of people is pretty odd psychologically. And the idea would be, hey, there's something wrong with their neurotransmitter regulation. Yes, indeed, there is. And so therefore we have medication for it. No, you don't. Okay. It's vastly more, the problems are not caused by a single neurotransmitter problem. And so now that we understand the cause of schizophrenia, we understand that it's thousands of little mutations. So therefore, it's not going to be in one single neurotransmitter change. So there's not going to be a solution that's going to be, increasing or decreasing the amount of dopamine or serotonin or any other damn thing. So but in principle, we understand that you can have oddities, both physically and psychologically, that would be something akin to, hey, there's something wrong with normal neurotransmitter function. Yes, indeed. That doesn't mean you guys have a solution. You're about 3,000 years away from a solution, but that's not a problem. I mean, God bless you for trying. You're a 7th century BC person trying to do neurosurgery. Okay, well, good luck to you all. But the point is that by not using the theory of evolution to guide the thinking, that what we have then is we have this inference that the reason for these problems are massive, physiological disruption and dysfunction inside of huge amounts of humanity. Well, it doesn't make any sense from the standpoint of evolution. You don't have 38% of the gazelles don't know which way to run when they see a lion, for God's sakes. So that doesn't make any sense. And the psychodynamic notion that we are repeating and have incomplete issues with the issues that happened when we were 7 years old is absurd. No, it doesn't make any evolutionary sense to build an organism in that fashion. None. Okay. So it's a nice story, and it lines up to the fact that odd personalities with their struggles and interpersonal difficulties, they show evidence of those at 7 years old. And so when they're 37, they can think back and it was shitty when they were 7. And then if you coming from the standpoint of sort of a blank slate-ish model, then it's like, well, something must have happened to you to wreck it. And it's like, no. It turns out, now we understand, no, that isn't what happened. It was showing evidence of some sort of characteristic of problematic personality characteristics all the way at age 7. It's already evident. Okay, so you can give all of these schools of thought a pass because you can understand why they came to where they came to. But in every case, none of them was starting their analysis on a solid footing. So why would we have a bunch of people with, quote, overly negative thoughts? Nobody in the cognitive therapy, genre ever asked that question. Why would this be so? Okay, so why would this, that question didn't come up. And so instead, 50 years after Aaron Beck or 60 years after Aaron Beck, people from my persuasion are coming along and they're saying, well, now, wait a minute. Maybe that isn't how it works. So maybe ones that are essentially in order to get the resources necessary to secure them for survival and reproductive success. And so that someone who is evidencing a bunch of negative thoughts, that's because they've gotten negative feedback. And there's nothing irrational about those. They're completely reasonable. And they may be a little exaggerated as they're weaving their way through the evidence because they've been so surprised. In fact, they are not naturally pessimistic. They were probably naturally optimistic. And they were then put out in considerable time and energy in pursuit of competitive success. And they failed repeatedly, and they can't understand why. And now they're demoralized. Okay, so it was actually their optimism. They were overly optimistic about how well they were going to succeed. Now they are demoralized and or ego trapped. And so they're in a very interesting motivational dilemma, and they're walking into the therapy session, and it may sound like the cause of their depression is, quote, stinking thinking, irrationally negative thoughts, but actually it doesn't make any sense to make an organism irrational. Okay. Your organism is designed by nature to be incredibly smart about making causal inferences. And so you're going to find that most people that are depressed are actually making completely intelligent causal inferences. If that were not true, then it would be a simple matter to say, oh, well, you don't realize you're a lot better looking and could be more successful than you think? Hell, go on Match.com or Tinder and it's all going to change for you. It's like, oh, you're underestimating your how attractive you're going to be to the job market, for God's sake. Just put your resume out there. In fact, we'll do it together. We'll solve this problem in the next half an hour. Just email it me over. I'll email it out to a bunch of stuff and it's all going to get good. No, it's not. That person has already done those things. The reason they're depressed is that they've gotten failure feedback that is discrepant with what they expected in the first place. And so they're actually in essentially a recalibration process that's painful. And that's why they're depressed. And so now the question is, the depression remains because there's a discrepancy between part of their analysis that still can't understand why they're not being successful. And so our job as a therapist is to say, why did you think that that was true? What have you done about it? Is there anything we've overlooked in the competitive process? That's how we're going to address this problem. So we're not going to hit them over the head and tell them that they're irrational, that they're being unrealistically negative. Oh no. I have rarely seen people being unrealistically negative who presented to me depressed. They presented to me as extremely rational, that their depression made complete sense to me, and they're confused. So what it is that we're going to do about it. So I forget where this all started, Nathan, and since I just talk, instead of having Dr. Hawk come in and say, "Wait, we're going to modify it," that's all grand always here, but it's just sort of getting out to weave this out. This is the extraordinary value of getting your reasoning on extremely solid ground. It was for me. So that was the first time I ever felt the ground solidly under my feet about understanding psychology, was when I read The Selfish Gene. And so the same kind of feeling of security and relaxation and confidence is going to be necessary for all kinds of people. And the more little instability and as you say, bright and highly conscientious, they are seeking that feeling of relief. Okay. Dr. Alan Goldhammer did something once that was very interesting with his son. His son was about 5 or 6 years old. And, little kids will keep asking why questions because they're trying to figure out causality. And so one day, Alan thought, because we got a very bright person there was real curious and motivated about this kid. And normally he would give the kid explanations and then move on and have other things to do. And he decided one day, I'm going to keep answering these questions in detail until this kid stops. Okay. And that conversation went on for 2 hours. There was a string of questions that did not stop for 2 hours. And at the end, Alan was seeing what it would take to satiate that brain. And it went on and on and on and on. And at the end, for a while, the kid was finally satiated. And Alan called me up and he says, I just figured something out. That's genetic. There's a feeling that comes from getting an explanation where you understand. And that kid was craving that feeling. And every time I gave him a little more, but it opened up some more loops and opened up some more loops. And finally, that brain, eventually got tired of it. But that was a fascinating thing. And so that's different people, or just as the people, like different amount of spice in their food or excitement running down a hill on a roller coaster. People differ how much they need the feeling of security, that they understand the details of a set of, causal vectors so that they can actually predict the future accurately. And that is why you will find people wedded to that. And that is a deep genetically built personality characteristic.
That's great. Yeah, I remember.
All right.
I remember my dad actually. He's very similar to Larry in terms of
Yes.
high conscientious. He's also a structural engineer, so it's like the perfect
Yes.
personality that you
Yes.
want every structural engineer to have this type of personality. And after every tragic
Yes.
disaster, Titanic, the World Trade
Yeah.
Centers, the 9/11, he would go in and actually read how it failed, what happened, what exactly he has a deep understanding of every fail, a lot of these major failures.
Yeah.
And so when we were growing up, and even today, when he watches his grandkids run around and play around, what he'll do, you see the corner of this desk, like he'll find all the corners of the room and put his hands over them to cover them.
Oh,
And then he can sit there peacefully and relax. And his main thing when we were growing up, he didn't want us to like fall and poke our eye out of a corner of one of the desks.
yes.
And
Yes.
to him, that was his biggest threat. And so then he just, when we were growing up, he had put like little things on the corners and then he could relax. And
Yeah.
then he was just have fun. The kids play around. So now as we grow
Yeah.
up, we do the same thing when the kids are around.
Yes. Super interesting. Exactly. Grand.
Yeah.
All right. Next question.
All right. Our next question. This is for Dr. Lisle. Most experts blame the parents when their adult children estrange from them, even when there was no abuse, neglect, drugs, etc. when they were growing up, and their childhood seemed pretty normal and enriched with activities, family, vacations, etc. Is there something else going on? Trying to reconnect or talk may yield a peripheral relationship, meaning once or twice a year, a text or on the phone, saying hello for the holiday. Yet, as older parents, we not only lose closeness with our children, but our grandchildren grow up unaware of who their grandparents are. So the question is, as a parent of 2 out of 3 adult children, am I wrong to just be worn out from hoping and trying and wanting to just wish them well now and move on with my life? It's been so many years that they seem like strangers to me anyway. Thank you very much for your insights.
Yeah. I've seen this on many occasions clinically, and um, there's generally a couple of ways this comes about. The I would say the most common pathway for this, in other words, the cause of this is always a disagreeable personality. So we've got effectively two people in a relationship. One of them has to be disagreeable. Maybe both of them are, okay? But from my standpoint, I have counseled many very, very sweet 65-year-old people who were completely reasonable, but their children, one or more of them, were not. And they were disagreeable people. And so unfortunately, what's going to happen then is that disagreeable people will see uh, will see trade processes as unfair to them. And so they're, whether it's I'm not being treated right in the restaurant, I shouldn't have to wait in this line, whatever it is. They're just walking around with a degree of irritation that isn't there 100% of the time, because sometimes they're being nicely rewarded, then they're happy. Okay. And sometimes their mind might not be on the self because they're watching a game and they're watching their team win or something. So it's not like they're chronically angry all the time, but there's a latent, chronic, recurrent irritation that's kind of come about from disagreeable people. And it's not uncommon for children to, adult children that are disagreeable, to smell that there's still, resources that ought to be had from the parents. And then sooner or later, the parents kind of draw the line on something, and then the kids are bent out of shape. And so there's conflicts, and a lot of times adult children will withdraw from their parents in essentially a threatening stance. That it's the latent threat is, well, I'll keep you away from, I'll stay away from you, or I will keep grandchildren away from you. In other words, unless you somehow make it worth my while. So and those children can feel very justified in that, because they feel like, have they gone to therapy and they've looked back at all the terrible things that their parents did because they didn't encourage them to go to art school when they should have, and therefore they didn't get to live their dreams or whatever the hell it was. So the point is that very likely the therapists are going to side with some complaining 35-year-old about their parents, about how unreasonable the parents are. And then that resonates perfectly with the 35-year-old's, 80th percentile disagreeable personality. And so they dig their heels in and essentially keep leveling threats about vague compensation, you know what I mean, for this sort of thing. And that's kind of how things go. And I've seen a lot of parents bend over backwards financially and otherwise to try to essentially take care of this, terrible thing. And let's just all get on the same page and let's just let bygones be bygones. It's like, no, it's never going to happen. The people on the other side of this are unreasonable, and they are not going. They also can smell they've got a tremendous amount of leverage in the situation. They can feel it. You know what I mean? They know that they are the genetic conduit. And so as a result, they sit in a position of power in a lot of ways, and they can be brutal. And I've seen it many times. I must have seen this at least 20 times in my career. And so it's irritating. It's disgusting in some ways, in the same way that, basically entitled people will disgust us. But there's nothing to be done about it. This is genetic, and it's not an uncommon pattern in my career for there to be, some person, some older person that that is a sweetheart that's getting tromped on, and it turns out, yeah, they married somebody pretty disagreeable, and that child has those disagreeable genes, and it's like, i.e., we unfortunately violated rule number 1 of life: don't breed with freaks. And so anyway, in long answer to the question, hey, is it just fine to just sort of move on and give up on it? And the answer is absolutely. That is an extremely reasonable plan. That these, you have to look at every relationship as sitting inside of a cost-benefit matrix that's associated with everything else in your life. If you spend another hour trying to convince your daughter that she's being unreasonable about this or that, and you're trying to be nice about it, but she's being consistently difficult and demanding, it's like, well, that's another hour that you didn't play bridge or play tennis or watched Hogan's Heroes reruns or something else that would have been a hell of a lot more pleasant. And so these are unique relationships in the sense that your mind, it's hard for you to come up with something that would have more potential impact on gene survival than to have a good relationship with your adult children. In other words, so it can feel like the only game in town, and if you don't get to play it, you know what I mean? This is just some tragedy. And the answer is, yeah, it's not the only game in town. There are other resources other than children in the world, and you can have a very fine time in this world with friends and romantic partners and all other kinds of social processes that can be very positive, and we don't have to keep trying to wearing ourselves out trying to collect a relationship out of a difficult adult child. And that the same is true with a obviously a parent could be an older pain in the ass that at 35 years old, you look at your dad and you're like, why do I keep twisting myself into a circle to try to win this guy's affection or love or support or anything else? It's like, give up. That is often the smartest move on the chessboard. So yeah, families are potentially the greatest source of essentially Hamiltonian. It's a Hamiltonian kicker. In other words, that we not only share a lot of characteristics with them oftentimes, and oftentimes have reasonably similar interests and reasonable similar abilities, and we become friends through the repeat exposure process. But it's also true that we've Hamiltonian altruism that can extend out to family members genetically, that it's built that way. It's made to tie us to these people. But that doesn't mean that even with the Hamiltonian, that they're worth it. If there's sufficient enough conflicts of interest between those two individuals about interests and fairness, then hey, disagreeable distance. And so, yeah, it very honest to people to run an experiment. You know what I mean? You know, let's tell your kid, hey, you know what? I'm going to be fine, and don't be worrying about me. I'm taking a break for the next 3 months, and when you don't hear from me, it's not because I've disappeared off the face of the earth. I just feel like you're just going to try to back off a little bit because it seems like we have a lot of contentious process. I'm just going to see what it feels like to just kind of pull away for a little bit. Okay, not meaning to be mean about it. I'm just kind of running a little experiment with my life. Okay, reasonable. And then go run that experiment, see if you can get out of a little drug addiction of the anxiety of being connected, and see what's on the other side of it for you. And very often what's on the other side is a lot of inner peace.
Yeah, in the
Yeah.
same way that we were talking about Dr. Goldhammer's son feeling that sense of peace and relaxation once he got the explanation that he wanted.
Yeah.
Is that possible for even non-genetically related friends and other things to feel that security and feel that that's an insurance policy and that's a valuable person in your life? Can it be the same or similar to actual genetic
Oh,
relatives?
yeah. No question. In other words, the evolution of the human pack certainly was made possible by the Hamiltonian fractions that are sitting inside of people. Like there's, your brother, your sister has enormous impact on your own genetic success, and so therefore their survival and their success is important, and can be a great source of vicarious joy to watch them be successful, and a source of consternation and angst when they're doing poorly. So that's all in the game, but they are not the only sources. Okay, they are not the only sources, and so you are always designed by nature to have friendships to be super important, and certainly romances to be super important. And so we can see that hopefully you don't have any significant overlap at all with some great love affair. And let's hope it's not like, secretly a first cousin. And so the bottom line is that, and yet that person and their life experience and how you feel about them can actually overshadow and dwarf anything in your family potentially. So yeah, absolutely we can. There are, it feels like when it can feel like letting go of a dream. So very often in life, we have to let go of things that had enormous potential, had evidence that they had future potential, and yet the evidence finally accumulates and we have to let it go. So, if you fall in love with a stock, you're in trouble. I know a woman that got some stock as an employee at a young company, and she got 1,000 shares or whatever it was. And at a moment of extraordinary success for the company, those shares were worth like $300 a share. So she had $300,000 to just a little person that earned $30,000 a year. This was an extraordinary moment for her. By the way, this is not a client. I'm not telling a story here. This is a situation that I was aware of. And despite all kinds of good advice from everybody around her, she would not dump that stock. Okay. And so she felt a loyalty to it, and she could not let go. And that stock rose all the way down to worthless. So that was a catastrophic mistake. I mean, she survived, but the point is that is a very, very expensive mistake. And so we don't, whatever it is, I have to be a surgeon. I can't be anything else. It's like, well, yes, you can be something else. And if you can't be a surgeon, you can have a very fulfilling life doing something else that's highly productive. So we don't have to have anything work out. You don't have to have a good relationship with your son or daughter. Okay. You don't have to be close to your grandchildren. Boy, that's a tough one. You know what I mean? Because people will find out that they've got perfectly good psychological connection with the but those grandchildren are being held hostage, and they are absolutely part of a resource chessboard with a disagreeable adult child. And there's not a damn thing you can do about it. And so the truth of the matter is you have to understand, I need to let go. And so there are times when we have to face that a very complicated, thing where we have to let go of the potential because it's too expensive. It's just not the right move. So there are times for that, and usually the way we make those decisions is through well-considered experiments. Well-considered experiments will usually help us reveal, what the underlying truth is. Yeah.
That's
All
fantastic.
right.
All right.
One more.
Let's
See
take
what else
one
we
more,
got.
Doctor. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm curious to know more about the magic 10% and how that it's impacted by personality. For context, I'm a 32-year-old male dating a 30-year-old female. I'm high in conscientiousness, low in neuroticism, slightly more disagreeable, slightly more open, and slightly more introverted. I've had many sexual partners over the years, mostly by females approaching me, and I feel gross for writing it. I just think it's relevant for the context. But I was never in the right frame of mind to settle down. So now I'm in my 30s and I want to start a family. I've started dating a beautiful girl who I have strong feelings for, but I'm unsure if it is love. She's high in neuroticism and middle of the road in most other traits. She loves me. She very much loves me, and I very much enjoy her affection and spending time with her. I'm unsure, though, how much my personality prevents me from feeling the love that she feels, as it is evident to me that she loves me much more than I love her. We have started talking about the future, kids, house, etc., and these are things we both truly want. My line of thinking, however, is similar to a, quote, close enough is good enough deal. And although I know that sounds crass, I'd like to know this information, as I don't want to turn around one day and have ruined this beautiful girl's life, wasted her time, as I believe these are her very most important years for her in particular. Sorry about the long-winded question, but I often hear you say how you would need more information or context. Really enjoying the podcast. So I'm just curious to see what you have to say. Thanks for your time.
I think, did we hear that the girl is 30?
30, yeah, 30,
Okay.
and he's 32.
Yeah. Okay. I'll tell you my first reaction. So my first reaction is that this is not a good situation. So
Doug, before you answer, can I
yeah,
try to reconnect with you? The
yes,
video, your video is just completely garbled, and I'm hoping it'll record fine, but I just want to double check that we can connect again.
absolutely. Go ahead and reconnect, and we'll try. So this is the question about this young man, 32 years old, has a 30-year-old girlfriend. A lot of good things about the relationship, and but he does not feel as much as she feels, as far as he can tell. So I would say that the following is true, that that yeah, I have a number of thoughts about this, and my very first thought, which is the bailout function, is that we're under no obligation to be making a decision. You just let the next year, basically dump information into your head. Okay, that's what you're going to do. That's the right move to do. And so relationships have a tendency to effectively, I mean, this sounds ridiculous, but it's true. They either get better or they get worse or they stay about the same. Okay. And so in any way, though, we at any moment when we're in one, we don't know whether it's going to get better or it's going to get worse or it's going to be about the same. So the fact that it will do one of those three things is actually extremely important and useful to know. So if this girl were 36, I would be saying, oh man, you've got one of the really tough decisions in life. Okay. Actually, she has one of the very tough decisions in life. And and it can happen that, then people have to, there's a famous quote from somewhere that, probably the Bible or something that says, take what you want, God said, and pay for it. And so if you want to have a family and you've got a girl that's crazy about you and you like her quite a bit, but it's not actually hitting as many circuits in you that could reasonably be expected to be hit in a really first class romance, then you are taking what you wanted, God said, and you will pay for it. And you will pay for it. And you may be willing to pay for that because that is how you're built. Somebody else who has a more romantic soul would not do that. In other words, they will be wanting to have a relationship that hits 80% of the possible positive circuits instead of 60. So so no one could fault you for that decision, except that understand that at 32 years old to be making that kind of a call, I think that it's a shame. If it's in the Stone Age, that's reasonable because you're probably going to be dead in 12 years. But if it's in the modern environment, you're going to be alive for another 50. And 50 is a long time to be alive and to integrate your life with someone who essentially there's something about who it is that she is that you are finding your mind being emotionally stingy because it's not giving you a lot of moods of happiness behind who it is. Okay, it's giving you some. So yeah, I would. So the solution to the problem is to, for God's sakes, as you're talking about the future, well, of course you're talking about the future. You qualify for her, and she is wanting to nail this thing down and essentially, establish an exclusive lifetime pair bond. She's wanting to get a 50-year decision made here. But you, on the other hand, are clearly ambivalent about this. And you're probably, being somewhat deceptive about that ambivalence, just out of kindness and also out of keeping your own options open, and all out of, she's got some neuroticism in there. So we're wanting to keep some emotional stability in here. We're not trying to throw her, off her emotional equilibrium unnecessarily. But the truth of the matter is you have a hell of an assessment to do. And my attitude, if you haven't known her for that long, it's like, okay, fair game to take a year. Fair game. She's 30 years old. We are not taking years 36 to 37. If you were taking years 36 to 37, then I'd have you on the phone and we would be talking through every single angle of this thing, trying to understand where you're really at, why you're thinking the way you're thinking, and really trying to see if I can find something in your calculus that's due to a lack of information that I can provide, which sometimes happens. In other words, when I get in somebody's head and I can effectively look at the chessboard through their eyes, I can see that they don't see things and that they are potentially, if I can say, oh no, you understand that there's a gambit here, there's a different way to do this, and now that you see it, you're going to think differently about the moves that you're making. So that's what I'm here to do, is to do that. And in order to do that, I have to get inside that person's head pretty deeply so that I really understand how they're running their cost benefit analysis as closely as I can figure out. And I can tell you very often when I do that, I find things that I absolutely did not expect. So it is not uncommon at all for me to be 38 minutes into a conversation where I've been asking everything under the sun to try to understand what they're thinking, and then I trip over a major minefield that I had no idea was there. Okay, i.e., well, I thought I might as well get with it because, my dad died at 50 and my granddad died at 50. And so I'm 34 and I'm thinking, well, I've only got 16 years left, so I better get on with it. It's like, that's the kind of thing that I will sometimes trip over. And the person is operating under a significant delusion. And as a result of that, they are very often, a delusion is, well, I'll grow to love this person. It's like, yeah, no, you won't. Okay, so that is an extremely common delusion that people will feel like, well, it's pretty good, and what the heck? It's like, yeah, what the heck is, what the heck makes sense if it's a 3-year decision, but if this is a 50-year decision, that's a terrible strategy. So yeah, so I would say that 32 is way too young to be thinking from this particular perspective, i.e., good enough. Um, and furthermore, there's a great deal of evidence that will come in over the next year that this could come from, hey, maybe it's good enough to, wait a second, I'm not very happy. Okay. So it doesn't happen that you have to find out anything particularly negative about this person. It's that your own calculus at seeing what her deficiencies are, you will find evidence that those can be commonly fixed because you'll see superior characteristics in a lot of other people. And so you'll start running an overall calculus and you'll start thinking, well, now, wait a minute. These characteristics bother me sufficiently. I have a feeling I can find somebody better if I'm willing to go through the process. My mind starts telling me that the odds are pretty good. I could probably find somebody better in 2 or 3 years. Okay. So you can't, nobody can talk that inference into you, but a year of some real mediocre hours and feelings shifting away from you with respect to this partner can cause you a year from today to be saying, no, this is not actually good enough. I need to be moving on. Okay. So the solution to the problem is not going to be to reason it out through analysis from here. It's going to be, additional evidence that needs to come your way. And I can't talk into you a different way of analyzing fundamentally the problem, quote, the good enough problem, because that is ultimately a personality characteristic. That's how that works. So that, there are people that are remarkably, quote, good enoughs, and there are people that are impossible in their romanticism that they can't find anybody, and there's everything in between. So the human being has the capacity for exquisite and extraordinary happiness when you get it right. Okay. Not very many people will find it. They will find a pseudo version of it they may get married behind that pseudo version. They may spend a lifetime in something that clearly didn't match up to the promise that they were feeling in the first 60 days. But the capacity for a really high level of happiness in a relationship is possible for humans. Probably not possible for all humans, because some humans are too disagreeable and unstable, and it's actually not possible for them. But for many people, it is possible. There's a reason why this craving sits inside of human nature. It's there for a reason, and it's there to make people, pretty freaking discriminating and be pretty stingy with happiness behind this, as it leads us to try to make an exquisite pair. That's what it is. So that's how it works.
Phenomenal.
Yeah.
Yeah, I imagine with more dating options, it gets even harder because it reveals our unique, stingy preferences or really nitpicky preferences.
Yeah, it's actually, I think Jen and I had a conversation. Yeah, in our living wisdom library thing that we do, and we had a conversation about this. Similar question came up, and I probably said this before, but it just came out, last week or two on this question, where I said, the bottom line is that this is the nature of the species is to be difficult to please. That's the truth. Okay. These investments in children as a human are huge. And therefore, from both sides of the equation, when it comes to this, the love chip is very demanding, and it insists on a really pretty exceptional trade opportunity, or else it's not going to fire up. Okay. And it will fire up false alarms, you know what I mean? Because it's designed by nature. It's not designed to be unbelievably ruthless and Germanic about having it proved to it. It's designed by nature to fire up excitement and anxiety at trying to actualize opportunity if it looks very good. Okay. And so many times in this lifetime, most of us, will have a number of opportunities where we're very excited, and we're going to have most of those opportunities will result in disappointment and disillusionment as we find out that our nervous system was stingier than we thought. And so that's how that works. But yeah, in this particular young man's case, it's like you're discovering the stingy nervous system. And in there, we have to look at that real carefully about whether or not we walk away from the promise that's on the other side of that stingy nervous system. It's stingy for a reason. And that is, it's saying there is a legitimate opportunity for significant upside. So we cannot give you a high level of happiness under the given trade circumstances. Okay. And to try to get it to do so is to try to have you say, well, you should just be happy with your job.
Learn to be happy.
Learn to be happy with your job. It's like, yeah, not if I think that there might be better opportunity out there. There's no possible way that I can learn to be happy with my job. I might not be miserable, but I will have a little quiet ache that says, why did I play this life so conservatively? Okay. And that will be the price that God will extract if a person makes that choice. Yeah.
Fantastic.
All right, Nathan. Very good. We'll see if we get Jen back anytime soon. We're not sure. I know she's very busy right now, and she's up to her ears in a bunch of stuff. So, but otherwise, we'll get together. Thank you, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
That's it for this episode. I really appreciate you watching, and I hope you enjoyed the discussion. Please make sure to click like, share, and subscribe, as it helps out the channel a lot. If you have a question or a situation that you'd like asked and analyzed, you can send it in through the website www.beatyourgenes.org, or you can email me directly at beatyourgenes@gmail.com, and I'm happy to put your question into the queue. If you're a new subscriber to our YouTube channel and want to listen to older episodes, you can hear them on any major podcasting platform like iTunes, Spotify, Libsyn, or others, or again, just go to beatyourgenes.org. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you all next show.